I think we are going to start because many are waiting for us on the live stream, so we should not be too late to start. I guess the rest of the crowd will join bit by bit. So my name is Jean Gazançon. I'm the CEO of ARTE Generali, and we are helping to set out this event. I started working a long time ago, and I was trained as an economist, so very far from the world of art. And I had certainties as an economist can have regarding price modeling of assets. At that time in the 90s, that was the thing which was very much on the top of the mind of everyone. And then I lived 2008 and the market collapse of financial market collapse in London, and all of a sudden there was no more market. You could not give a price to the most liquid asset in the world, and that was a kind of extremely strong moment in terms of recognizing that illiquidity is extremely difficult to handle when you want to give a price. So when you know that the art market by itself is totally illiquid, it is even more a challenge. So in my brain, I had this kind of conundrum, and then I went back reading Fulton. Fulton is the first economist who wrote about pricing of art and market of art in the 1920s. He was a Norwegian guy, but he was working in Cambridge, in the microeconomic school of Cambridge. And he came to the conclusion that art has no utility, so it was not functioning like a normal object. And it has limitless value because the liquidity was the only real factor and the appetite of the ultimate buyer. In fact, the ego of the buyer. So I was very proud of me because I said, okay, I have the absolute rationality in the pricing of art. And I told my wife, who is an art expert, art historian, so she came from a totally different background. And I said, well, you know, honey, I have the clue. It's about liquidity. Liquidity is king. And she told me, you are just a moron. You don't know what you are talking about. And you are not even true to yourself, because I've seen you spending during 2 years at least 1 hour a week when you were living in The Hague at the Mauritshuis to watch the view of Delft. Every week you did that. So this piece of art has no value because it's part of the collection. It's limitless in price, certainly, but nevertheless, you went on watching the view of Delft at least 100 times. So it must have a value for you, which is of a different nature. And she went on, and we went on discussing about artistic value, emotional value, historical value, and all those things. Then I was really in a mess. And the mess was even worse because we were starting ARTE Generali, and as an art insurer, we need to give a price, we need to give a value to our clients. We commit for a value. This is our fiduciary duty. And I had no solution except the traditional solution of art insurance, which is very long, very costly. You get in contact with art expert, and then 6 months later, they sent you a very nice document. It has cost you thousands of euros. The client is normally very frustrated because he's still not yet insured, but we ask for money at the same time. Well, you can imagine this kind of situation. And so I decided to go west, because in Europe, since 1917, normally when we have a problem, we go west, because normally the light comes from there. And so I went west in Canada, where this lady and her partner, Olivier, were working in a startup out of the University of Toronto, which is now well known because 2 Nobel Prizes were given to 2 academics this year regarding the research on artificial intelligence. And I raised my issue. I mean, can you help me? And they say, yeah, we can. Of course, they are from the West, so they can. And so I said, explain. And they explained the model, and we went on. We did back regression. So it was a solid model. So I said, okay, I understand. And we went on to implement the model for our underwriting process. So we use it when we price a client. But also we give access to our client, and you will be able to get this access later on in the show. Of course, it helps the clients to understand how the price is formed in the market. What are the factors? And this rationality is the one I have acquired with this journey learning along the last 20 years how a price can be formed in the art market. This is this journey we are going to do all together, and thanks to Jeni. So she will not castigate you like my wife did with me. She's a very nice lady. And she will take you through the same intellectual journey of understanding how we move from value to price and how can technology help us to understand this formation and how we can be at ease with those notions when we practice them. So, Jeni, yeah, two things. Please, just switch on your phone. That's a message which is, I think, important. So phone off. And the second one, it's not the dietary. No, there is no issue with allergen or things like that, no?
No, the panel will be in English.
And the panel will be in English, but you have guessed that because it's already on.
And
Jeni.
lastly, I'm sad but there will be no questions. Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Welcome from my side as well, and welcome to my panel. I would like to introduce them. Over there, we have Kay Watson, who's the head of Arts and Technologies at Serpentine Galleries, London. And she's a researcher, a producer, and curator working with art and advanced technologies, photography, and video games. She's, as I said, the head of Arts Technologies at Serpentine and a trustee of the Photographers Gallery in Mediala. And she has been very involved in the exhibition that's currently on show there, which is with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. And she'll be talking about ideas of ownership and how they're employed across when you have multiple different people working on complex projects together. So I think it's going to be really interesting to hear her perspective. Then to Kay's to the left, to Kay's right, we have Jérôme Poggi, of Galerie Jérôme Poggi, which he founded in 2009. And it's one of the most important contemporary art galleries in France with a strong international presence. Jérôme also has a technical background. He was originally trained as an engineer, and he's a graduate of the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, the EHESS, in Paris, and of the Sorbonne. He's practiced as an art historian and curator for 15 years, and held several positions in his curatorial function. So please also join me in welcoming Jérôme. And then last but not least, you already had a wonderful introduction from Jean, but I would like to add a few points to that, if I may. Sophie Perceval is the co-founder and co-CEO of Wondeur AI, which is an AI fintech company providing insurance companies, wealth management firms, and cultural institutions with intelligence on trillions of dollars worth of art assets. That's a lot of money. Wondeur is developed by a world-class research team of PhDs from the University of Toronto, MIT, and MIT Media Lab, working collaboratively with preeminent art specialists. She's also a trained economist, and she brings to Wondeur 25 years of experience in the contemporary art world with a focus on artist development, research, and innovation. Sophie will be explaining to you exactly what Wondeur does, because it's very interesting. Now, let me just from my side, quickly give you a brief introduction of what we're going to be talking about, because I think it's something quite fundamental. I mean, what do we mean when we talk about an artwork's value? Is it just its price in dollars, euros, or Swiss francs? That's one aspect. But art is unlike any other object, in the sense that we value an artwork for what it represents culturally, aesthetically, emotionally, historically, what it can say about us as humans and about human society. Artworks occupy a special category of objects. So just talking about the price of an artwork feels a little bit like shortchanging it. What happens when there's only a spotty auction record, for example, and we don't know exactly what this particular artwork is worth? Or if the artwork doesn't lend itself to traditional pricing mechanisms, as with more advanced forms of blockchain-based artwork or artwork based on artificial intelligence, as with some of the more advanced things that we see today. Value systems are dependent on context. How do we create value around new forms of artworks? How do we also create prices for artists who've not really been on the market, maybe, or have only been present in smaller forms in institutions? And then lastly, how can institutions and museums create frameworks for art? And this panel is going to attempt to untangle some of the complexities of what we mean by artistic value today. So let's jump right in. Sophie, Jérôme, why is price misleading as a sole indicator of an artwork's value? Maybe Sophie first.
I'll try. Okay, I'll try. I think behind price, we think there's a simple answer. It's going to be a dollar amount, euro amount, whatever amount, but it's going to be an amount. And the more we worked on artists' careers and position in the art world and markets, the more we understood with our team that you can't talk about price as a singular. It's prices and different kind of prices and different dimensions of price and different temporality of price. What is price today, what was priced yesterday, what will be priced tomorrow. And price is an extremely complex notion when you talk about art. It could be a notion that's very fluid, that changes fast or not, that stales for years and then swiftly changes. And so we made a point very early on of actually defining different ways of looking at price, and we'll talk about that. The picture you see right now is the way we approach the ecosystem, the art ecosystem. These are exchanges, the circulation of artists between art institutions. So it looks like flights, trajectories. It almost is. It almost is, because it's about an artist showing here and then showing there, and then from there showing somewhere else. And it's only 3 months of activity in that global network. And you can see Europe is kind of super active there, because there are so many institutions that are sharing or exchanging or circulating artists globally. So what we are looking at when we're looking at price is what's behind it, and what's behind it is this. It's the activity of the art world, and this is not the market. This is galleries, but it's also not-for-profits, artist-run centers, museums, residency programs. So it's an incredibly complex network, web of institutions collaborating together, whether they know it or not, and just exchanging ideas and artworks and artists through time. So that's my short answer to why price probably is not the ultimate answer to how should we value art. You know, there's a forest behind that tree.
Jérôme?
Well, that's a very vast question, actually, and I think there is a fundamental difference between value, that is a kind of concept, and a price, that is a measure of that concept. And actually, even though I'm a dealer, I'm speaking about price very little, because that happens only when there is a transaction. So it is something that you can forget, I mean, very quickly. I mean, a price of a work of art. So although the value of a work of art, you know, I spend my day, you know, when I'm introducing the work of an artist, I'm speaking about its value, that is historical, that is political, that is many things. So yeah, price something that is very volatile, I would say. And there are some examples in the art world about, you know, these questions about what's the difference between price and value. I'm thinking of one of the artists who mostly question what is the price and what is the value of a work of art. It is Yves Klein, you know, the painter who did the ICAB, International Klein Blue. I don't know if you know about the show that he organized in January 57 in Milano at Galerie Apollinaire, where he exhibited 10 or 11 monochromatic paintings that were all the same size, exactly the same size, same technique, same date. I mean, they were exactly the same, but they were priced differently. So he decided that the price would not be the same for all of them. And so then questioning what does determine the price of an artwork? Is it its inner constitution? So because in the general economy, when you define the price, I mean, you take into consideration the production cost. That's a very important element also in the determination of the price. So here, all of them at the same production cost and the time spent also, because the production for a work of art is not only the components, but also the time you spent. And the time you spent is not only the achievement of the work, but also the time you needed to think about it, and then, so it can be years, actually. So that's an element. And then after, the other thing that can define the price is a very common law of offer and demand. So that's the commercial value that you can add on top of the production value. And so here again, in the art field, it's something very difficult to determine, because our economy is not ruled by demand, but by offer. Mm-hmm. You know, and so our job as a dealer is to create the demand. So the artist is creating an offer that no one is expecting, because most of the time you try to analyze, you know, do a kind of benchmarking and analyze what are the needs of people, and then you answer this need, and then you can determine the most precise price for it. But in the case of an artist, you know, he's creating something that no one is expecting. So then after, it's very difficult also to take into consideration, I mean, the demand for it, just to determine the price. So it makes no sense. And the other thing also that is useful to determine the price is the competitive context. And because, I mean, then you can be the same price as your competitor or a little lower if you want to raise some markets. But in regard to an artist, I mean, we could say that, I mean, one artist has no competitor. I mean, there is one Picasso and not two Picasso. If you want a Picasso, you have to buy Picasso. You cannot buy a Picasso at Matisse. Okay? So Matisse is not producing Picasso, and Picasso is not producing Matisse. So there is no competition. What is just a certain view, because it is not true, of course, you have a competition, and then a collector can hesitate, should I purchase a Matisse or should I purchase a Picasso? So I'm saying all that just to say that, yes, that notion of price is quite tricky. In regard to the value, it is disconnected to the value. And then we also have to add something, is that the price can be determined by a currency, by money. Right now, I was thinking of it, you know, we have a booth at the Grand Palais showing the work of Kapwani Kiwanga. She's a French-Canadian artist who is participating to the Biennale de Venise with the pavilion of Canada that she's representing. And her project is entitled Trinket. Trinket in French is called, it's babiole or pacotille. And it's a whole project about the value of exchanges. So what she did is that she's using what was used during the 15th century as a form of currency. It is beads, glass beads that were produced in Murano. So that has no value. This is not gold, you know, that creates the value of the currency. It is really trinket, babiole, pacotille, that was used to negotiate an exchange with indigenous, I mean, people in Africa or South America. So I give you a ballot of these conterie, I mean, these glass beads, I mean, in exchange of gold. And so it is totally unbalanced, you know, that exchange. So I think we must also take into consideration, you know, what is the currency, what is, you know, that, embody the price and that, embody also the transaction.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really a good example as well. And another aspect of this is that a price changes, right? I mean, because as you said, the market demand for an artist can change quite rapidly. We've had this over the past sort of 3 years, where the so-called sector of ultra-contemporary artists, so young artists who started selling at around $10,000 for a painting, went to auction at around $300,000, were resold extremely quickly within about 2 years. The average time between auctions is about 30 years, and then only to see their prices collapse by up to 90% as the market dried up due to rising interest rates, due to worldwide conflicts, and so on and so forth. But does that mean that the artworks all of a sudden became less important, more important? You know, what does it actually say, art historically speaking, about these artists? So then I wanted to now turn to Sophie. Sophie, at the heart of Wondeur AI sits a complex model that takes into account an artist's exhibition history, both at the museum and at commercial galleries. AI-based analysis then codifies this into a proxy value, a value that goes beyond price and is aiming to create stability, because artists might have more museum shows than they have sales. This does happen. Can you tell us about the system and how you came up with it? And can you talk us through some examples?
So very quickly, you know, it's very interesting you brought up Kapwani Kiwanga, because she's one of the artists that are showing in the Biennale in Venice. And we looked at all the artists showing in the pavilions, in the national pavilions, and those having a solo show. So artists that are considered by at least a few people as important enough, relevant enough to be dedicated an entire space to show their work. Out of these 55 artists in the Venice Biennale right now, only 5 have significant auction results, meaning more than 5 in the last 5 years. Kapwani Kiwanga doesn't have a significant auction result history because it's not the type of work she produces. She produces monumental installations mostly that don't go to auction because they enter collections of institutions that don't go through this market. So these artists that have very significant work but don't have auction results today are a very big problem for experts, insurers, anyone dealing with the management of these artworks, because we don't have publicly available data to document their value. and auction results of documenting less than 1% of the market. So what do we do with the rest? And so we looked at, and I'm going to explain a bit how we look at careers. We looked at everything else that goes into substantiating a price, which is not the history of auction, but actually the history of careers. And we looked at artists that are stars today that didn't start at the top. They started as emerging in around 2000.
Yeah, as you said on the slide, yeah.
And so 15%, more or less, of artists that are in the top 2% in terms of recognition today in our system, 15% of them were emerging in 2000. So they've gone through a huge evolution in terms of career. What happened? What contributed to that evolution? It's actually a very large number of shows. On average, it's 117, but actually it's higher for female artists, as you can imagine, because they have to do more. It's on average 77 unique institutions, so different galleries, different museums, different not-for-profit that actually decided to show their work. So it's quite a large base of validation. It's not just one gallery that decided, oh, this artist is going to be my next star, and I'm going to put this artist forward, and we're going to make a market for him or her. It's really a very large consensus system. And 16 countries, it's actually 18 for female artists on average. So it's actually a very interesting web of validation. And when we started looking at that through our data, that's how we understood that we needed to actually address the vast majority of artists that didn't have auction results and produce values that would be a proxy of their market value. Instead of looking at sales, we would look at the fundamental bottom-up value of their art based on where and how and with whom they've shown over the last few years. So that's really the basic of what we do. And the result of that is that we monitor, we track this massive pool of art assets that don't have any other way of being understood. So that's why we talk about trillions of art. Trillions of dollars of art is not the art that transacts every year. It's actually art that sits in places, sits in people's homes, sits in collections, whether corporate or public museum collections. All of this art that is just sitting there, that is not sold, that doesn't transact, needs to be documented, needs to be understood at its cultural value, at its...
It's the things we look at when we go to a museum or a gallery at the weekend.
Exactly.
You know, it's this idea of like noticing things about the impact that these artists and their works have on us as a society. And I think that's what you're trying to
That's what we could talk
capture.
When we talk about cultural value is, an artwork that is not seen by anyone, that is just developing in a garage. It could be the best work in the world. It's amazing, it's compelling, it's powerful. If it's not shared, it's not part of culture. That's it. I think it has to be shared at this level to become part of culture. So that's why galleries, institutions, all play in building up this cultural value, in making these works actually a shared experience, and that's where the value actually sits, right?
Should we talk through a few examples, maybe?
So it's just to give you an example of what we mean by cultural value. So I can show you actually the career shape of the Kusama shape. So that's the shape of the career of Yayoi Kusama, just to give you a sense, very similar to a lot of female artists, where it's very quiet for 40 years, and then there's an uptake. So for her, it happened in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, where she really started to have solo shows and more international shows in very important institutions. And then from there on, she hasn't stopped. So it just goes to show that there's no such thing as overnight success in art. If you look at the long term, it's always something that is built bit by bit, step by step, sometimes slow beginning, and then something starts to light up. This is not unusual. It's a similar shape for Anna Eva Bergman. We were looking at her career. Anna Eva Bergman until 2016, 17, 19, very quiet, but still, there was growth. The career was building up, but at a very discriminated pace, which is what we've seen in a lot of other categories of discriminated artists, like artists that are underrepresented in the system. It could be the medium they're working with, because their medium is not easy to show. It could be new media artists, artists working with code in the early days. They were not shown in institutions. It could be artists coming from communities that were not part of the establishment, so they would be always struggling to get in the big institutions. But that gives you a sense of the incremental aspect of a career. And actually, when you look at value through this lens, you understand that the artists, the ultra-contemporary artists that saw their prices really collapse a few months ago, and it's tragic for them because they sold their pieces for $20,000. It then was resold several times at auction and then collapsed, and they feel like their art is worth nothing anymore. Their art is actually solid. They have to just trust in that and keep building incrementally, and most of them will, and they will come back to a different way of building up their career than price. Lauren Halsey, we put it up because she is showing at the Serpentine right now. So in our ranking, she's in the top 3% in terms of cumulative cultural value and cultural importance in the world. So it's really what she has built as a career. And here you can see the stages and how she started with CalArts, and then the Studio Museum in Harlem, and then little by little her work was recognized by other institutions visiting these places. That's why we talk about institutions collaborating. They don't shake hands and say we're going to collaborate, but curators go to the Studio Museum in Harlem, see her work, think maybe she would be great in our show that we're putting up in London next year, and that's how art circulates, right? By everyone in this world looking at what others are doing and sharing knowledge through that process. So this is how we look at the solid, fundamental rock base of value. When you don't have that, value is very fragile. And so we're also using this technology to also try and help people understand how to avoid speculative danger zones, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can also help if you as a collector are looking at...
And as an artist as well.
And as an artist as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what I think is so interesting is how international it is and how it's reliant on this virtuous circle almost of actants within the art world. Okay, the Serpentine as an institution has a long history of really promoting artists and building projects together with them, I think, collaboratively, that are at the very avant-garde of where they are. I mean, right now you're working with two artists who are whose practice is so diverse, actually, that I find it very hard to put them in a box. Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. I mean, Holly's a singer. They are technologists in many different ways. They had a big podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about the exhibition and how it came into being, and what leads Serpentine through those curatorial choices?
Yes, I'm probably going to take us slightly off on a bit of a tangent here. So I think to begin with is worth saying I manage a department called Arts Technologies. We really focus on how technology is going to influence or impact society, and we do that through these creative projects with artists, but we also do it with research and R&D. So as a team, what we're doing is we're really producing these very collaborative projects. And I think it's very important, the term production here, because I think it's a term that is often very undervalued, actually, speaking of value in the art field more generally. And we become involved with these artists. We work with them for a long period of time to develop these collaborative projects, of which I say project because an exhibition is one component of it. And an artwork or an art object might be another component of it. We also develop software, we develop processes, we develop all these kinds of things through the development of these projects. Sorry, I just wanted to just say quickly, on the first question around price, because I very rarely ever use the word price in my day-to-day life. The sort of economic or financial sort of language that I'm using is cost. How do we afford to do these projects? How can we afford to pay people? How can we afford to present them in our spaces? But then also value, of course, which is obviously what we're talking about, but to really think about art as a process, as a space that is inherently societally value. We know that incorporates financial value. But the processes, all these, but we also need to be able to operate as well. So I'm not, without being naive about our relationship to the market and all these kinds of things as well. Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to say that because I thought it was interesting. A term that I don't think, I haven't used the word for years.
What, price?
Yeah. And so obviously this is quite a unique offering, if you like, and the reason for this is that we're able to learn and to contribute and to really support artists to do these very ambitious projects. And so working with an artist like Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, really, so they, as you say, they're musicians, technologists, they get involved in policy conversations around the impact of AI. Holly has a PhD in computer music, so, and composition. They have very interdisciplinary, very vast, varied experiences, and I think that
Sophie, when we started,
demonstrated, right?
Yes, because when Sophie, she said they're very difficult to trace in Wondeur.
Well, yeah, because their
music aspect doesn't help.
I guess, also comes from the fact that they have a successful music career, right? And so the institutions there are not the museum institutions; it's the record label 4AD, and so it's a different kind of these different institutions that become part of the sort of the reputation or the legacy of the work. So with this project specifically that we opened a couple of weeks ago, the sort of starting point here was that the sort of question or the point that Holly and Matt wanted to bring forward was that for them, all processes in the training of AI models is art making. So that is collecting data, training of the model itself, the governance of that data is all part of the art-making process.
Because data now has intrinsic value in and of itself. I mean, that's another thing, and people are now capitalizing on data.
Also to other fields, I think it's worth saying. And the other thing we were doing is Holly and Matt have done a lot of work around the creation of a synthetic, Holly synthetic voice, and a governance structure around that. The sort of technical question we wanted to collectively answer was, can we make a choral, a polyphonic AI model? Which we did, which was quite difficult. And then to test this governance framework in doing that. So the resulting project, if you like, is the exhibition, which is a sound installation. It's the R&D through the data governance project that will have resonance in other fields. We will produce reports, we'll produce papers that will exist in its own world.
Can you maybe explain a little bit by what you mean by data governance?
Yeah, sorry. So that project is something we call the Data Trust Experiment. So in making this project, we travelled around the UK recording 15 UK professional and community choirs. They were recording songs or new compositions that Holly and Matt had created for the purposes of training an AI model. What we wanted to do through this process is to test out a structure whereby all of the choirs who had contributed to this data set would continue to be attached to this model or the models that were created through the project. There is some work happening in other circles. There's a lot of discussion around this in the NHS or around the use of medical data and various other fields around this idea of a data trust. And so we were working with the Centre for Data Futures at King's College in London and another organisation called Radical Exchange to examine what the different kind of legal frameworks could be in place to ensure that the choristers were able to make decisions about how that data set was used. Now, that's obviously really complex. We did a lot of, we actually employed a data trustee or a data intermediary as part of the process of doing this, with experience of doing these kinds of, I mean, there aren't many projects like this that exist. So we did a lot of consultation work. So there's a lot of learning to be done around data rights with the choristers, and collectively a decision was made about what the structure of that would be. And on the long term, Serpentine is actually going to be stewarding that data set. So there's a whole complex web of licensing and legal structures in place to enable this to happen, both with Holly and Matt, the choristers, Serpentine, everyone else involved in the project as well.
So it's basically a test case.
And
Yes.
the question you're asking, well, they're asking with this work is also the question of the redistribution of value. There's control,
Yes, exactly.
but also value.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's so fascinating because, and Jérôme is a historian of that, but the question of where the value stands, whether it's in the object, you know, whether the object should be sold or not, or you should just pay to see it, and then that's where it stops, right? And the original would stay with the artist. The distribution of value in the art world has been discussed. There are utopians, dystopian, you know, scenarios around that. But there's a world where we could imagine that Serpentine, as a producer of this, Jérôme Poggi Galerie, as a producer of some of that career, at some point should be recognized as contributing to the value chain. And you had this magnificent, fascinating panel this week on Thursday with Dame Julia Penton-Jones and Sylvie Patry about galleries and institutions and how the market and institutions work together or permeate, yeah. and how these worlds actually interconnect. But the value is not shared across the board. You know, it's a complex exercise to actually say, well, Serpentine produced this, how can it come back to Serpentine? Or how can a gallery who develop an artist up to point A until the artist switch to another gallery could be retributed for building up this audience. Basically, you're building an audience for a work, you're building an audience for an artist. We couldn't dream of a way to actually recognize that, the collective value of building the value of art, because there's no way, we haven't seen one example, and we're going back 200 years of art history, we haven't seen one example where the cultural value of an artist would rely on one person, one gallery, one institution. That doesn't exist. It's a intrinsically collective process. So I think you're maybe allowing that conversation to happen again through a very edge case, which is this data governance, exercise. But it's actually asking those questions.
I mean, I think it requires more of a licensing model, right, as opposed to a proprietary model, because the way the art world works right now is quite simply you purchase an artwork from a gallery or you bring an artwork into existence, and then when an artwork is produced for a museum, say, there's a big question about where the ownership within that lies, you know, because sometimes it goes back to the artist, sometimes it stays with the museum currently. And then when the artwork is resold by the collector, the money goes to the collector, and if that artwork happened to sell for much, much, much more money, the artist doesn't benefit, the gallery doesn't benefit, hardly anyone benefits apart from the new seller. And then this has been a discussion in France particularly. We do have artist resale rights here. It's also a discussion currently in Korea with the new Art Act coming in. There's quite a bit of controversy because, again, it requires more documentation. It makes the barrier to entry more higher, but in the end, it might create a fairer art world, which I think is something that all of us sitting in this panel are interested in. I mean, I also wanted to just switch to the gallerist's perspective, because obviously a gallerist has got a big role in establishing artists also at the very beginning of their careers, working hand in hand with institutions to realize. So how do you make those decisions? What are your first moves when you start representing a young artist, and how do you price the young artist as well?
Well, that's the worst part of the job. I mean, the one that is really tricky to define the price for an artist. But before answering, I just wanted to add something, because we said that this is really a network, the definition of the value that is also engaging. So, I mean, many actors, but also I would like to include the collectors, because, I mean, many collectors you have different sector of the economy of art, but before reaching a speculation, that changes totally also the definition of the price of a work of art. Before speculation, I mean, many collectors are investing money in works that will not, be priced in a higher way afterwards. And so they are really something like patrons also. And what they are financing is the R&D. We spoke about R&D and allowing an artist to be able to develop his experience And so what they are also financing is art itself, not only a work of art, but art, and so they are participating to culture and a political economy of culture. So I think this is something that we have to point out. Then to answer your question about how can we determine the price of a young artist, that's quite difficult. As I said, we are thinking of first the cost, as you said, of production. But something else, and I agree with you, price is something that as I said, I'm not using that much. And it's very momentary. At the moment, there is a price at the moment of a transaction. But if not, there is no way. No need to speak about price. Then after, beside the cost, you have the means that are necessary also for the artist to be able to develop his work of art. Because some artists are producing a lot of works, for instance. And so then you can... how would you say, répartir, you can...
spread the value.
Yeah, spread the value on, many works. Some artists are not, producing so many works. So then it means that one work must be more expensive than the others. And then after you have to position the artist in regard to some other artists of the same generation. And so that's when it becomes difficult also to have the knowledge of the public price of some of the artists. So the only public prices until now that are accessible are the one of auction houses. And so that's really a treasure that you are offering also to be able to define another value built on the institutional shows of the artists. So that's really wonderful. So that's the way we are trying to set the price of a young artist.
It's a question that my VA art students most often ask me, how do I value my own artwork? And then you start talking about exhibitions, and you say, oh, you need to start showing in a project space, you need to start talking to curators, you need to enter this network, actually. And it's only by virtue of being part of this network that finally you can start thinking about what is the monetary value of this should it come to a sale, because also quite often early in an artist's career, that is not a question really to be asked. And sometimes it's never a question to be asked. Now, one of the newer developments, I would say, over the last sort of 10 years has been the entry into existence of non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, and which are contracts on a blockchain where the price value equivalence, I'm going to call it, is extremely visible. So when you look at an NFT, classically, there's a price associated with an Ethereum or Tezos or another cryptocurrency, and you go into your portfolio on one of the larger blockchain providers, and you can immediately see what the last transaction price is. And that, to me, was quite tricky, because if there's not enough demand for that artist's work, that immediately puts a downward pressure. And because the way we see price is not just as a neutral thing, a price in pounds, Swiss francs, whatever it is, it's not neutral. If it goes down, it usually means something negative for the artist, for their career, for who they are. And if it goes upwards, we usually associate with the positive thing, So price in itself has a symbolic function. And so I think having a very clear price value equivalence can be detrimental. This is why the whole symbolic system surrounding generating artwork prices is so kind of cloak and dagger and obfuscated. And I was wondering, from your point of view, Kay, who's kind of also been involved in these discourses, I imagine, how you saw this development and what your evaluation on the impact of the wider art scene was. I know it's a big question, so you might want to tackle one single aspect of it.
In terms of NFTs or?
NFTs, I would say. And it's more about the price value equivalence that you get there as opposed to NFTs as a technology themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, my interest in blockchain, it is an area of interest for us from a research perspective, is not necessarily, strictly speaking, around, NFTs, the NFT mechanism is something that does provide value, right? Because it brings in scarcity into
digital art.
Yeah,
yep.
Exactly. Or, well, not even just digital art, like the internet, basically. I'm probably going to slightly send us off in a different direction, maybe, because I think to focus only on the sort of financial value of blockchain and the mechanisms associated with NFTs is just really one way of seeing something that has sort of can also impact artistic practice and the value of artistic practice in other ways as well. So, for example, I think what you mentioned before around transparency, around transactions, that also provides a different layer of provenance, if you like, which is maybe the most straightforward way of thinking about it. But from my perspective, when I'm looking at these projects that involve lots of people, there's also a potential around governance structures within how those projects function, which I think can also assist with a redistribution of value further down the line. Apologies for me trying to deliberately take us off in another direction, because this is the direction I find interesting. And it's something we've done. You know, my colleagues, Victoria Ivanova and Tommy Introna, have developed something, a blockchain sort of licensing system called partial common ownership that focuses on a notion of stewardship versus a notion of ownership of objects. Now, that isn't to say that there wasn't like a really, and I can talk more about that at another time, because it's, you know, it's a whole, it's all about how you deal with these kinds of incredibly large collaborative projects in which so many people have contributed from, and you could say, or invested within that project, not just institutions, but other entities as well. But also how you might be able to redistribute value also to other kinds of communities. So much more of like a social practice element to it. Now, I was going to come back to NFTs, but I cannot remember why. But I think what I wanted to say was that there was a really rich, how do I say, community that developed around the sort of NFT explosion, if you like. Yep. I'm not sure if explosion is the right word, but the sort
implosion.
Of the boom. And you know, with that, you know, it sort of replicated a lot of things that exist within the traditional art world as well, in terms of like, you know, people invest in art in order to make money from art, right? So no different from any other way of seeing like an investment in art. But what I will say is, to me, the sort of digital art practice is more diverse than purely just talking about the NFT world. But that doesn't mean I don't think it's valuable, actually.
And actually, you know, it's very interesting that when we talk about NFT, we talk about money. When we talk about digital art, we talk about no money, because basically there's no market and no money for that. So it's interesting that the NFT bubble was really a way to try and put some money on that. But there's also the making of a validation system, which is something we've discussed with Jeni before, which is how a piece of digital art in that space, in that community that is the NFT world, actually came to emerge from the sea of pieces and artworks that were produced. And the process of emergence, of validation, of distinction, of saying, well, this is more interesting than any kind of JPEG, was actually very interesting in itself. And it's a different path to emergence, like another way of emerging for some pieces that were not produced by well-known artists or well-known figures in digital art. So that's for us something that we're working on in terms of tracking this validation or emergence system that actually isolates or identifies a few very, very limited pieces in a sea of productions.
I think it's also no coincidence that the boom also happened at a time during the pandemic, right? So I think it's also about artists. And many, many artists I know were completely reliant on that income during that period of time when institutions weren't showing and when, you know, the whole, everything like completely shifted. So I think it is also about artists, and it was also, could even say at times, about solidarity in that. So yes, just wanted to add that.
I actually wanted to switch gears because we're coming towards the end now, but I also wanted to talk about two very specific examples that are gallerists, the artists with Jérôme's gallery. Anna Eva Bergman, who is a female artist, and Dario Villalba. So why don't you talk us through these two positions? And maybe you can do this in dialogue, actually.
It could be a dialogue. Yeah, actually, because I learned a lot, you know, when we spoke about these two artists. So we are representing the estate of the two of them. So Anna Eva Bergman, we've been promoting the work of Bergman for the last 15 years with the Fondation ARTE Bergman that is in Antibes in France. And so that's a case that is interesting because there is an institutional support behind. I mean, Fondation ARTE Bergman has financial means that allows them also, and they are organized, and it's been existing for since the death of the two artists by the late 80s. So it's been something like 30 years. And Dario Villalba is an artist who passed away only 6 years ago. It's a family that is running the estate that is not really has no organization. So it is a total different way of thinking an estate. And when we prepared, you know, the panel, I mean, you learned me so much about, you know, but really giving to me arguments, you know, that allows me also to defend the prices of the
That's what we looked at. So, and actually, that was interesting.
That's interesting maybe to have a dialogue about it.
Yeah, so I think what we discussed when we talked about Anna Eva Bergman is that, you know, the shape of the career is the one we saw for Yayoi Kusama, where you have this kind of quiet slope, you know, easy, and then, well, hard actually, hard career to build, and then boom, it goes up. And Jérôme was like, oh, that's interesting. That's when we started working with her. So, well, congratulations, because obviously you were part of that impact, and that's something that really put some really speed into the sharing of this work and the expansion of our audience. And then we looked at what the AI has to say in terms of the value of the work. And you will see what I told Jérôme is that what's interesting in those values are the gaps. So there are three ranges here. You have the range that's based on the career, that's the intrinsic value, let's say around $300,000. Then you have the range at the bottom that's around dealer market value, that's around, let's say, 800,000. And then you have the liquidity value at auction, which is what would happen if you were to sell this work tomorrow. That would be around 600. So what it tells you here, and I think it's a bit, you know, then you're like, what should I believe? Like, where is the real price? Where should be the price? Here we have a typical example of a female artist whose career is actually behind the market, which is unusual for every other category of artist. I mean, you have to have a kind of a career catch-up phenomenon to see that, where the career is not actually on par with the level of recognition that the artist is getting today. So it's like the career is lagging behind what the market and the collectors and today's actions are saying. And so the market is actually higher than the career, but it's not a speculative situation. It's actually a catching up phenomenon happening because actually her growth is very fast. So in her category of star artist, she's already in the top 0.8% worldwide. She's growing faster than many other artists, meaning the interest in her work is really having momentum, and she's being shown and exhibited and put in dialogue with other artists more than many other artists. So this intrinsic value is on the rise. And so it just shows you where the career is, where the market is. And when we looked at Dario Villalba, it was quite different.
It was backward.
It was backward, yeah. It's a different story where there's no liquidity, basically. There's no liquidity value because the artist has not been traded at auction, that's it. So if you look at auction results as a way to justify a price, you'll be lost because there's nothing to look at, maybe one result, and it's not significant. You can't say, well, it sold once for X, so it must be worth X. No, so you have to look at a longer period, more substantial explanation for price, and that's where the intrinsic value is helpful because this is the weight of the career. The career places the price of this artist at this level, around $50,000. And actually, dealers are selling for less than that. And that was interesting for Jérôme because actually, why was it interesting for you? Because I think you've never seen that, right?
And for you too, I think that the right moment for you to buy the Dario Villalba.
Yeah,
if you want to speculate.
She's doing that my job better than I do.
No, but you know, I think I really believe that the liquidity element in the market, and that's where Jean started with, is something that is bringing so much pressure on people supporting the artists. Because when you can't prove the resale price, because here, there's no activity, that's it. Doesn't mean it's worth nothing. It's just there's no one sold a piece. That's it. It just means that. It doesn't mean it's worth less. But when you can't prove the resale value, all of a sudden the value becomes fragile. The artist becomes fragile because they can't justify, they can't prove that, yes, there is a kind of a solid, robust base to this price long term. And so we very much believe that this kind of understanding that's more complex, it's not an A or B answer to what is the price of an artist, will help people take more risks and take a chance and think, okay, well, maybe Villalba doesn't have anything, on ArtNet, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't pay attention because obviously he's in the 3% most important artist in the world and he has a lot of things to say and I'm going to read a book about him and I'm going to support the work,
Absolutely. But you are really quantifying what we've been saying. I mean, our job as a gallerist also is just to try to define an intrinsic value, but we have no tools to do so. So I think the AI is really producing a tool that allows us more efficiently to determine these intrinsic values. So that's very helpful. The only thing is that it's not reachable publicly.
Generali is doing this patron, wonderful gesture of sharing that. Because we can't afford to give this for free to everyone because it's actually very complex technology and expensive technology to build. So we sell it to our partners who are insurers, banks who need that to understand the risks on the portfolio they insure or they use as collateral for lending. But yes, you can have a little kind of sneak peek of what the technology can offer by going into the ARTE app. I mean, you can download it for free. It's using the Petit Palais free Wi-Fi with the QR code. And I think you have up to 25 searches where you can check 25 artists and you will see, some of these results. It doesn't show you the entirety of the system, but it will show you there's at least 200,000 artists in there that you can check and you will learn from it.
Wealth, yes. Yeah. I think, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I feel like our discussion could go much, much further, but we only have this hour. So I wanted to express kind of concluding marks. You see that value gets ever more complicated, and it's a lot depending on actually artists and the artworks they're making, the technologists and producers they're working with. And as we have more complex systems, then price just becomes less and less interesting, actually, as a marker, of a way of valuing and evaluating an artist. So I wanted to thank the panel, obviously, for your very thoughtful contributions. I wanted to thank Generali, Leonie, Jean, Laetitia. Thank you so much for your support here. And thank you for coming and spending an hour listening to us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.